One, and we're in. How you doing today?
I'm doing well. How are you, Ryan?
I'm great. Thank you so much for coming into the studio. It's a great start to the week.
It absolutely is. Although I must be honest, I'm looking forward to the holidays because during the holidays, the courts are closed. So I can actually take a real vacation.
Wow. So that's something quite specific just to lawyers,
Yes, it is.
and perhaps if you're being accused of a crime.
Absolutely.
So we have the holiday coming up, which is wonderful. So basically, I this is the first time we've met. We don't know anything about each other. So how about we just kind of jump in the deep end and see where it goes?
Let's do it.
Okay. So where are you originally from?
So I'm originally from Iran.
Mhm.
My family moved to Southern California when I was 3.5. I guess I would be first generation, correct? So, first generation Iranian American, first in my family to ever have gone to college, finished college, and gone off to law school.
Wow.
So, I don't know if that's a good thing or bad thing, but that's my story.
Do you remember anything from Iran?
I don't remember many things, obviously, because I was only 3.5, but I do remember our house. I do remember my grandmother who lived with us, but that pretty much is it.
Yeah. I've been to Iran 3 times. So I went there first in 2002, and then I went back in, like, 2004, and then I think again in 2007, and it was all to do, like, photography and stuff like that, and I found the country just completely spectacular. Like, the history, the people, the culture. Obviously, the images that you see from the government and stuff like that are heavily distorted about, like, what's really going on in the country, but I fell in love. I did, like, a whole tour around Iran and thought it was pretty spectacular.
Yes, I would love to go back and visit. Obviously, I've never been back, and I would love to go back and visit, hopefully with a new regime. So
Yes. Okay, so at 3.5, you are pulled out of Iran and relocated to Southern California. And what was that journey like? Like, how did you feel growing up in Los Angeles?
well, it was like this duality. And I think a lot of people that come from different countries would understand that. Like, part of you is the traditional sense of with your family and trying to keep all of the traditions. So you're not disappointing your family. And then the other side of it is you want to become Americanized as soon as humanly possible because you want to assimilate with your friends and school. So, for me, that was an easy journey because obviously I was 3.5. So I understood Farsi, I spoke it, and then I quickly learned English.
Mhm.
And then for my siblings, though, 3 of which, are all older than me, it was a little bit harder for them to assimilate because they were in their teens when we came to the States. So it was a little bit harder for them, but for me, it was sort of a breeze.
Yeah, I can't imagine. Like, I talked to a lot of people on the podcast, like, who are kind of transient and whose parents moved around a lot, and they had to, like, start new schools every 2 or 3 years and everything. But doing that in high school, or doing it like for your older siblings, coming from Iran to LA must have been really challenging because just culturally completely different.
Yes, culturally completely different, the language, the different religions, right? Everything about it was different. But, obviously now we've been here forever. So they've assimilated quite well. But I would say that my 3 siblings would say that they're more Iranian than American. I would say that I'm more American than Iranian.
Well, that's interesting. That's just a few years gap between you guys, and you have had kind of totally different experiences.
Yes,
Yeah.
absolutely.
Oh, it's interesting. It's interesting. So, I mean, what was it like? What was it like kind of being in high school in LA? Like, tell me that experience, because very different than anywhere else in the world, I'm assuming.
Yes. So, here's the thing, and your listeners that come from Iran will appreciate this. Our fathers are extremely domineering. They traditionally are, they want to keep the culture, even though they live in America. And so, going through schooling and in high school, and then I went off to, college at Loyola Marymount University, which I'm So proud of that school, by the way. It was difficult. It was a challenge. It was, him constantly wanting, like, no sleepovers, no boyfriends, no going to prom. It was just a lot of no's. And so, I deem that to be negative, right? Because I'm just trying to assimilate and go with my girlfriends or have boyfriends. And it was always a struggle, I feel like. And my mom, on the other hand, was great because she was a school teacher in Iran. So she has a lot of background in psychology. So she'd say, like, let me break the bad news to her, And obviously, looking back on it, I just turned 50 in November. I could see that it was him protecting me, but at the same time, it's hard to tell that to a 12, 14, 16-year-old, 18-year-old that wants to go to like prom, right? So there was that kind of push and pull, I feel like, but we worked it out. I have a picture actually. I should have brought and to show your audience or your listeners of my dad when I graduated law school and how proud he was. And my dad was the type who did not smile frequently. In that picture, he was smiling because I sort of like had my arm around him. He was holding my, law degree and had flowers for me. And it was like, I always look at that picture and I go, Dad was proud that day. I can say Dad was proud that day, I've lost my father like 13 years ago, but he did get to see that and he did get to see me in private practice.
Wow. Well, that's amazing. I'm glad he got to see like the evolution of your entire educational and professional career.
Yes, yeah.
Yeah. It's not easy growing up in America when your parents have kind of lived their entire adult lives elsewhere, is it?
No, it's not. And but by the grace of God, I got there. So yes.
It's hard to let old habits oh, sorry, it's hard to let old habits die too. Like when you come to the United States, you don't necessarily want to embrace everything that is American because not everything American is good. Not everything is positive, not everything is healthy, not everything is good for you, right? But you're just kind of bombarded by this marketing machine that is America. Like I've only lived here for a year. So you've beaten me by like 47 years
Right,
living
right.
in the United States. And for me, it's been crazy because I showed up and my first year in the United States was an election cycle.
Oh
So
my goodness.
my head is like still ringing from just propaganda and garbage in the news all the time. But now it's nice because it's a little quieter.
Yes, yes. You have to sort of learn for yourself what to tune into and what not to tune into. And I think not because this we're on a podcast, but I think podcasts are so great because we get to decide for ourselves what we want to listen to and what we don't want to watch on the TV. And so I think podcasting is a great outlet. And I actually started the law firm started a podcast co-producing with someone else, and it's been great. So we'll talk about that a little later.
That's great. Yeah, no, it's true. It is kind of it's strange. It's the whole experience is kind of strange. But did you always want to be like a lawyer? Like did your was I mean, where did this influence come from? Like what did you study in your undergrad in university?
So, this will be a long, long conversation, but I'll shorten it. So, I wanted to be a lawyer since I was 5 years old. I realized early on that um, lawyers tended to, from what I could see as a 5 year old, and I grew up watching, Judge Judy. I grew up watching People's Court. Back then, it was People's Court, and all these different things on TV. And so I learned early on that I wanted to represent the underdog. I wanted to be a voice for the voiceless. And so, a lot of people go into law school and they go, I want to make money. I know lawyers make a lot of money, or I want to help people, but they don't know exactly how. And so, as a 5 year old, I knew I wanted to help people, but I didn't know how I was going to help people with my law degree. So, unlike most family law and divorce attorneys, in especially Los Angeles and Orange County where we practice, I know why I represent who I represent. And the firm is very big on representing the underdog. So what I mean by that is in a divorce situation, obviously there's the husband and the wife. And so the high conflict divorces that we deal with, obviously, there might be some mental health issues, there might be some alcoholism or drug issues. And so we always represent what we think is the innocent spouse, the person that has no voice. And, we try to bring that voice and use their voice in court. And so I'm really big on vetting the clients early on before I just sign them up, which is very rare, by the way, Brian, in family law and divorce, especially in LA, where you get a client that you sign them up and then you're off to the races. And a lot of attorneys don't really analyze their client. They just say, okay, if you can make the retainer payment, you're going to be a client. Well, we do a lot of vetting. And so I want to make sure that our firm is not representing the narcissist, or our firm is not representing the person that, is going to lie or have us lie to the judge for their beliefs. And so it's a lot of work, as you can imagine, because we're giving a voice to somebody that's never had a voice in the marriage. And so it becomes very emotional, obviously, for the client. I personally work with every single client. Now, divorce attorneys listening to this will not like this, but I send them to therapy. I say, go to therapy. Even if you go 3 or 5 times, you don't have to be in therapy for the rest of your life. But it gets to be very emotional because obviously a divorce is one of the worst times in someone's life. And so I try to bring in other professionals to help the client understand sort of what they're going through and what the process is like.
I think, isn't there some statistic like the 3 most stressful things you'll ever experience in your life is like divorce, changing a job, and moving homes?
Yes,
Yeah.
absolutely.
All 3 terrible things.
Yes, and then also obviously like death of a loved one, like we can all agree on that, but divorce is top 3. And some of my clients, I've had, previous, years, I've been doing this 22 years, commit suicide because they literally cannot take the emotional, um because there's a legal component, which is what I deal with, but there's obviously an emotional component when you have children, if they've been alienated from their children during the divorce process. All of that sort of comes to a head, right? And so um it's unfortunate. So I've seen this, Ryan, and it's heartbreaking.
Mhm. Yeah, it's not easy. When it's funny, I was watching a documentary television series many years ago, and they said, they were doing a statistical kind of analysis between, divorces in the United States. This was a it was a CNN, series about Scandinavia, and then they were talking about, divorce rates in Sweden, Norway, and Finland, stuff like that. And the divorce rates are comparable, like, roughly 50% of all people who get, married get divorced around there. But then they were saying, like, in the United States, almost all divorces require legal representation. And in Scandinavia, Sweden, Finland, Norway, and Denmark, less than like 5% of divorces required litigation, so or an attorney representation. So it just reminds you of like how litigious the United living in the United States is, because I've spent my whole life living abroad, and now you come in and you seem to like need a lawyer for everything, and everyone wants to fight. It's a totally different culture shift,
Yes.
to the way people deal with conflict and resolve their conflicts with other people.
Yes. I would say that, there are a general population that go through the divorce process and they cannot afford an attorney. That does happen. And so there are self help centers within every court in the county of, I can speak to Los Angeles, Ventura, and Orange County, where we practice law. There are self help centers. Sometimes they're hard to get to because you have to make an appointment and go back. And if you're working and have children, all that becomes very difficult. But Yes, I agree with you that, especially I feel like California, people are just litigious and you're right, they say that you should definitely have a family law attorney. I tell clients when we first vet them, if they cannot afford us, to just, they don't have to come up with the retainer. And what they can do is use us as consultants, just like they would for a business, because they can't afford a retainer of like 10, 15, 25,000. And so I say, when you need us, just make an appointment with my secretary and we'll do a Zoom and I'll kind of go over what the process is or what your ex's attorney is maybe saying. And so we do help clients in that way too, which I think that's a little bit rare too. I mean, that's a great thing about owning my own firm, right? I can do this and help people um, and kind of unbundle the services for them.
I think that's great when you can unbundle the services and kind of reduce some financial burden, right? Because obviously there's a lot of people out there that, they might be stuck in a bad marriage and then they actually can't afford to get divorced.
Correct.
Yeah.
I work with a lot of, obviously because of what I do and who I represent, domestic violence, men and women. And so sometimes it's hard for them to get out and they don't have, again, that huge retainer payment. So we definitely do give them breaks and we definitely do those consultations when we're needed.
hmm Just to jump back a bit. So you realized that you wanted to be a lawyer at 5.
Yes.
That's amazing. Like I'm so curious about this. So what was it like kind of going through high school, studying all these different subjects when you were just knew that you just wanted to be a lawyer? Like did you learn any musical instruments? Did you play any sports or were you just like lawyer?
So that's a great question. No, I did not actually. It was not involved with sports. I have now later in life. My husband's teaching me tennis. I do horseback riding. I'm taking lessons for that, which I love. It's like one of my favorite things. But to answer your question, no, because when you tell people that you want to be a lawyer since you're 5 years old, it's one of 2 things, okay, and it's only one of 2 things. They either think you're the smartest little girl, right, because you wanna be a lawyer, and that's such a huge, just desire, right? Or they think you're absolutely nuts and you're crazy and they'll try to dissuade you. So, and mostly the people that did that were actual lawyers. And they would say, you don't want to go into the law. You're too sweet, blah, blah, blah. And they'd give me all the lists of reasons of why I shouldn't go to law school. And maybe you should be a veterinarian. They give you like all these other things. And I was very clear, though, that I wanted to go to law school to help people, even though I didn't know what that was until much later in life. So, to answer one of your earlier questions, I went to school, undergrad at Loyola Marymount University. I was actually, believe it or not, which you're not going to believe this, okay? I was very quiet and very shy growing up. So, my oldest brother said, "You need to take communication classes. Don't go like poli-sci because everybody's doing poli-sci that wants to go to law school. You need to take communication classes." And I said, "Okay." So I took communication studies and psychology. And so that actually really helps me greatly in the family law business that I have now. But, as part of communication studies, you have to give speeches, you have to write, you have to do all these things. So that was very rare because a lot of, lawyers are, political science majors or economics or, business or, so that's also very rare that I chose that to get a bachelor's in that field.
hmm and your desire to go into family law. So you mentioned early on you realized exactly who you wanted to defend and who you wanted to protect. And I'm guessing that kind of focus in the early days led you into family law. Like how challenging has family law been in a city like Los Angeles?
So after and graduating from Loyola, I was always working for lawyers. I was always working for big law firms, even interning for them, I entered with the district attorney's office in a special unit called Stewart House, which they defend children who have been sexually abused, molested, or raped. So I've always worked again for the underdog. And I interviewed with them and I got a 98 out of 100 on their exam, but then there was a hiring freeze. So that's when I decided to go into my own private practice, but went to law school at Southwestern University School of Law, which is downtown. Love my law school. Very difficult law school, by the way. The entering class is like 380, the graduating class is 80 people.
Wow, they really weed them out.
Yes, so the attrition rate is very, very, so you can imagine you have to have at least a B average in order to get to the next, grade, so it's very difficult, and so
How sorry to interrupt you. How stressful is that process going into a law school that, that the majority of people don't even finish? Like you said 80 out of 320 or something?
yes.
Yeah. That's those odds are terribly stacked against you.
Yes. For me, I had great study partners. I'm actually still friends with one of them. He's a great attorney in Los Angeles. Does products liability. And so, the thing about it is that, you know, the way I looked at it is either law school is going to make or break me, and breaking me was not an option. So, while other students might have had like plan A, B, or C, law school was like, no, this is my plan A, and I don't have a plan B or C, so I have to succeed at this. And so, with that drive, it was like, yeah, even, law school is very difficult for anybody, right? It takes not only being smart, which people think it only takes, oh, the person's smart. It takes endurance. It takes you learning a different language because the law is, you know, very different than anything you'll ever learn. Some parts of it are Latin, obviously. And so I just did it, like there was no option to fail.
Do you think not having a backup plan like helped push you in those difficult times? Because I always talk to a lot of people who are, they're, whether they're athletes or whether they're business people or lawyers, and a lot of people who had that single-mindedness not to have a plan B or a plan C or any kind of excuse. And this was like, this is my only goal. This is all I want to do. This is me or die kind of mentality. And it actually helps them, achieve various forms of greatness. I'm just curious, like, whether you were conscious of that. Like, I don't have a plan B. This is all I want, and it's like this or nothing.
Yeah, I think it's the focus, right? You just set your mind to that goal and you get really focused and you don't take no for an answer. And so the law school obviously was that for me. I knew I wanted to be a lawyer. I actually never worked in almost anything else besides law firms. And so I knew I wanted to achieve this. Even if it killed me, I was going to get there. And actually, it's funny because I do these I do these sort of like mini marathons, like 10Ks and half marathons. And my husband is always like, "How do you do this? Because you're not really, athletic, so to speak, right?" Because I just said that my father was like, "No athletics, only studying." And so I tell him, "I'm going to make it because I'm going to focus on making it past the line where you go over the line and you get your medal." And so even if I have to, run like 10, 11 mile, 12 mile a minute, it doesn't matter to me because all that matters is getting that sort of medal, I call it, which is really cute because I just did the turkey trot and my husband's like, "You have not ran for like 6 months." And I'm like, "It doesn't matter. I know I can run. I know I can walk." And so it's that same mentality. And I think, Ryan, to your point, I think like you either have that mentality or you're making excuses or you have plan B, C, or D. And then it's like, well, then how badly do you want that?
Hmm. Yeah, and how good are plan B, C, or D?
Correct. Correct.
If they're not as interesting as plan A, you really have to focus and get ready. Yeah. That's interesting. So back to your so you were working for the city of Los Angeles. You said you did an internship for their program that helped children who were being abused and things like that, and you wanted to work full time with them, but they had a hiring freeze, and then that forced you into building out your own practice.
Yes.
Well, those are two totally different business models for being a lawyer, right? Like one is you work for the city or for the state or for the government, right? And then the other is you go out on your own. Like when there was a hiring freeze at the city of Los Angeles, like, how hard was that decision then to be like, "Okay, I guess I'm starting my own business?" Because, like, being a lawyer is one thing, but being an entrepreneur and a lawyer is totally different.
Yes. Well, in the beginning, I thought, well, I'm just going to open up a law practice. Remember, I had worked for different lawyers since I was, 15, 16. So I was like, I will open up my own practice. And my father was very entrepreneurial. So it wasn't like this was something that just came from out of space, right? So I said, I'll open up my own practice. I'll get a couple clients and I'll wait for the district attorney's office to start hiring again. And I wanted to really work in that division. So I, was really focused on that division. And so it never materialized. By the time I opened up my practice, this was in June 2003. Oh my gosh, I feel so old now. Right after I passed the bar, I got sworn in by a private judge and, really opened up my practice, like sort of did all the governmental things that you do to open up a practice, like getting a license and, getting an office. And at the time, my office was in Encino. And so just kind of did it, I believe you can put one foot in front of the other and just go. Even if you're going at a snail's pace, as long as you're moving, you're doing much better than someone that's not even following their dreams, is not trying. So for me, and realize that I had a father who was entrepreneurial himself. So he came to the US. I'm kind of jumping back to that with the mindset that we as his children could not ever say the word can't. Like if we ever said, "Well, dad, I can't do this," he would get really upset and he'd say, "Look, I moved my entire family and left everything I knew in Iran to come to the US to give you guys a better education. So, how are you saying you can't do something?" So, I had that sort of backing. And I know a lot of people maybe listening to this don't have that, right? They don't have that from their parents that actually believe in them. So, opened up my own practice. He was very proud, obviously, of that. And, just got first two, three, four clients. And back then, don't laugh, but it was all we had was the newspaper and the yellow pages
Back in the day.
back in the day.
Yeah.
That's what we had 22 years ago. And it was, of course, my dad wanted me to be on the Iranian, newspaper and Iranian shows. And I tried that, and that was interesting. But, I just sort of advertised and, within the confounds of the California State Bar, because they have very strict ways that attorneys can actually advertise. And so, just started getting clients. And as I got busier and busier, it seemed like working for the district attorney just was not going to happen the
Mhm.
way I had initially envisioned it.
Does growing up in like a tight-knit community like the Iranian community here in Los Angeles, does that is that helpful later on if you, like, go into business? Like, did you have any support? Because like, for people who don't know, Los Angeles is obviously, LA County is obviously a huge county of, like,
Yes.
30 million people, but there is a really strong kinda tight-knit Iranian community in Westwood, right?
Yes.
And I'm just wondering, like, if growing up in that community, and then being an entrepreneur, if you're able to go back into that community to help people, like, or whether you're I mean, obviously, your clients are everywhere, but I'm just curious if, like, anyone from the Iranian community helped out.
I would say, I was involved with the Iranian American Lawyers Association early on. I got up to, worked my way up to becoming vice president. Um, Yes, I would say that the Iranian community is very welcoming. They're not only welcoming to Iranians, but also non-Iranians. And so, it makes me think about Anthony Bourdain, who I think was a fabulous person. He actually went to Iran and said that they were the most hospitable people he's ever met anywhere he's ever traveled. So if you think about it like that, yes, they were very welcoming. Iranians in Iran, they consider you a doctor of law. So, like when my dad would say, my daughter is a doctor, people would correct him and say, well, no, she's not a doctor. She's just a lawyer. And he'd say, look, in Iran, she's actually a doctor of law. So he would get like sort of offended that people would say that. But that was just my dad, though. He always wanted to, really be supportive of his children. And so, yes, the Iranian community is very helpful, very welcoming. They take great pride when you are a doctor, lawyer, engineer, and that's kind of like a joke because those are our fields, right? We almost can't do anything besides that. But yes, they're very welcoming, and those beginning years, those couple of first couple of years when I was involved with the Iranian American Lawyers Association, it was wonderful.
So you start your own practice, and starting any business is incredibly difficult, right? The percentage of succeeding in a startup after 3 years is very, very small. You're really taking a chance. And I'm curious, like in your first, 3 to 5 years, you obviously wanted to focus on people who are underrepresented, people who are victims of various behavior. You said that also you wanted to work for the district attorney's office that protects children from those kinds of things. But in those first kind of 3 to 5 years, do you not just have to accept any client no matter what because you need to pay the bills and you're running your own business and you've got overhead all of a sudden, and like the decisions you make as an entrepreneur running your own business versus the decisions you make as a district attorney, as an individual lawyer, are totally different. And I'm just wondering, like, did you have to shift your focus? And the reason I'm asking is because I'm an entertainer, and I always have to make a different I always have to make a choice between stories that I want to tell and stories that I'm being paid a lot to tell, right? And there's always like a push and pull between my emotions on that.
Um, that's a great question. I do want to say, for me, and I know that this was a privilege that I had, I could pick and choose my clients. And so very early on, and that was the one thing that was sort of driving me starting my own law practice, especially in LA, which, there's listen, lawyers are a dime a dozen in LA. They just are. And so I just set my mind on the fact that I was going to be the lawyer for underrepresented people in divorces and family law. And one thing I want to tell you is that I actually did do what I wanted to do at the district attorney's office in my own private practice, in the sense that I represent, once in a while, I'll get clients where there's been sexual abuse by one of the parents. And so the other parent is coming to court and saying, I want visitation. Because unfortunately, in family law, the parents' rights trump the child's rights. So the parents' visitation rights to their child sometimes will trump what's happened to the child. And so that those are very difficult cases. And I actually have a case right now as we sit here today, in Michigan, where allegedly that's happened, and one of the parents has sexually raped their own child. And so I represent the parent that's like, I don't want that parent getting any visitation. And of course, the other parent is saying, I'm trying to not use gender, obviously, is saying, well, this is parental alienation. And so we have the district attorney involved, we have child protective services involved. Obviously, it's a court case. And I'm happy to say this. I'm very prideful when it comes to this particular case because I was brought into this case as a California attorney representing mom really representing the client and the child, and there's been no visitation for over 2.5 years because I literally said, over my dead body, the other parent is going to get some visitation. So, I'm sort of like a bull in a china, it's like, yes, I have this like sweet side to me, which where people were seeing that when I was younger, but I can also be very assertive in fighting for my clients. So, I think I did say, who was who, but, so and that's the case they brought me into, just happened that I got that case. So I do have those types of cases, so I feel like I'm doing what I would have been doing at the district attorney's office, but in my private practice.
That's amazing. Just to go back onto that case, like it's crazy that a parent can rape their own child and still be even considered for visitation rights. Like if you harm your own child, like you should be barred from seeing that child until they're of an age where they can make their own decisions about whether they want to get back in touch with you or whatever. But I mean, that's insane that the parents' visitation rights are considered higher than what's happened to the actual defendant or the child in this case.
Yes, it's very difficult, and unfortunately, and this is the hardest part, children are not competent to testify. So, until they're 18, which at that point, it's like, who cares, right? Because then they're not, there's no jurisdiction of the court. So, I had to learn Michigan law very quickly, and what happens is you can get an attorney in Michigan and just sort of, you know, represent, this client, like, one case, and so that was a process in of itself, but, that my client really wanted someone that understood sexual abuse of children, and so because I advertised that, obviously very widely on the on the internet and stuff, um, her mother reached out to me and was like, "We need your help. We don't think, the lawyers here in Michigan in this small county really know about sexual abuse." And so because the child is too young and can't testify, but there's physical evidence, Michigan is it appears to be very pro, 50-50. And so, where California there's no presumption of 50-50. Yes, courts want 50-50 between the parents, but there's not a presumption. In Michigan, there's a presumption of 50-50. So you have to show really that there was a lot of evidence. And of course, it's difficult to do that when you have, a 2.5-year-old.
Yeah. I mean, you must just come up against really terrible parents every day of your life.
I have to close my eyes because it's like, yes, it's not every day
All right.
because some cases, obviously, I do mediation, for instance, and that's a win-win for both parties. Listen, nobody wants to go through a divorce. I don't care who it is, okay? It is like we said in the beginning, one of the hardest times in someone's life. So nobody wants to go through that. But there are situations where it could be a sort of a win-win where both parties get a little bit, at least, of what they want. They don't wanna be divorced anyway, right, most of the time, but circumstances happen, and so people get divorced. We do, not only mediation, but collaborative law. I don't know if you've ever heard of that.
No, what's collaborative law?
So it's when both parties have their own attorneys and they sign an agreement that they won't go to court, with these attorneys. So these attorneys are sort of collaborative attorneys. And if they need to bring in, let's say, forensic accountants or a child psychologist, they'll do that in that, sort of in those meetings that you have with one another because you're not going to court. Should they decide that they want to litigate, they will have to find their own different attorneys, not the collaborative attorneys.
And is that specific just to California or just to the United States?
It's to the United States.
Mm.
I know California, when I started my practice 22 years ago, it was a very new concept. And there are attorneys, just so you know, Ryan, in California that only do mediation and collaborative law. Like they will never step foot into a courthouse. They don't want their own life. You sort of, like you said, like, what is it like, right? They don't want that. They only wanna do mediation or collaborative law.
Well, collaborative seems to be the best way forward, right? When everyone can agree that it's not working, and then they can agree to have partners to help them figure it all out, and then, of course, also agree to not litigate or not to go to court to do it, right? Because I'm sure that if everyone's cool-headed and relatively rational and reasonable, that everything can kinda be sorted out without having to go to court.
Yes, and it's difficult though, right? Because divorce sort of brings out the best or the worst in people, and it's usually the worst in people. And I would say the collaborative cases that I've had, it's like their second, third, or fourth divorce type of thing, where in a sense, like they've been through the divorce process once before, and they're like, I never want to go and litigate again. So let me do it in this sort of neutral place where we both have attorneys, so I feel like my rights are being protected, but I also don't wanna hurt, the person I'm divorcing. So, I'm a big advocate for collaborative law, although, our firm only does a small percentage of those cases because I'm known as a celebrity divorce attorney that does high conflict, type cases.
Right. And I guess, with attorney-client privilege, you're not allowed to share any of the really juicy details.
Not the juicy ones, but I can talk about a few of the celebrity divorces that, are sort of, are fresh in the media right now, such as, Ben Affleck and Jennifer Lopez. Actually, I do have a funny story about that. Not so funny, but kind of funny. So I did a whole series on how Jennifer Lopez and Ben Affleck were gonna get divorced within 1 year. And people on my TikTok came for me like you can't believe. They were like, "How dare you say this? They're so in love. Oh my gosh, this is great." She finally gets her happy ending. And listen, I'm a divorce attorney. I'm not saying I'm a cynic, okay? Because I don't think I'm a cynic because I have a very great marriage. I say I'm a hopeful romantic, not a hopeless romantic, okay? I'm very hopeful. But based on the psychology of them getting together, how they got together again, I don't know, Ryan. I didn't see them, being happily ever after. I saw it being a 1 year marriage. Everything was great, great, great in the beginning. And then reality was gonna set in, which happens. And I was like, reality is gonna set in, and this is going to end fairly quickly.
Mhm.
And it did.
Well, I just can't imagine, you know, being married to someone and not being famous and dealing with all the trials and tribulations of being married and having a family when you're not famous. And then to go through that when you're famous, to have kids, and then to also be in the news every day or on television every day, and to have good and bad things said about you all the time, and then to also have the pressure of being an actor or producing movies or making music, and then to also have a family and deal with that professional stress, and like, it just seems like a disaster waiting to happen for these celebrities who fall in love and think that they can, live happily ever after for 20 or 30 years. I mean, I was pretty skeptical about Ben Affleck and J-Lo also, only because I'm old enough to remember their first engagement and how much of a shit show it was. So I was like, well, that's probably also going to end terribly.
Yes. And the public, the people on like the TikTok were like, you don't believe in love and all this stuff and you're just, drumming up business. And I'm like, the reality is like, no, there's nobody that would want to make it have them work, have them work it out. But I just saw the psychology of it. And when I look at cases and I look at couples, I look at the psychology, like you said, is one of them famous or are they both famous? Because then that's double whammy, right? It's like, I love, Matt Damon because he said the reason why he has such a great successful marriage is because his wife is not famous. And I think they met at a restaurant. And so he says, she's normal in the sense that she's not famous. She doesn't want to be famous. Do you see what I'm saying? Like we don't even know that much about her except that when she's on the red carpet with him. So those types of marriages seem to work out because there can only be one star in in the family. And so I just think that people are saying now Taylor Swift and Kelsey and all this stuff like, oh my gosh, it would be so great if they got married. Like marriage is not, I don't know why everybody thinks they need to get married. Like some people don't need to get married, right? Like look at Goldie Hawn and Kurt Russell, although I don't know if they're still together. But like not everyone needs to be married. It's sort of, I can say this as a divorce attorney, marriage is a contract with the government. I mean, it sort of is, right? Because once you sign that piece of paper, the government is involved. And so, um, to that point, there's some couples that never file anything with the government. They just do a religious marriage and then they live happily ever after. And so, if you want the government to be involved, then just know that the government says that, all of your assets after marriage, unless you have a prenup, are 50-50 community property.
Mhm.
And so to undo that is very difficult depending on how many years you've been married.
So what I mean, obviously, what is the benefit of having the government involved? Because in every other aspect of life, you probably don't ever want to hear from the government ever. But yet people willingly get married every day and want to have big ceremonies and whatever. And I agree. Like I think if you're getting married for the PR story, it's probably the wrong motivation. But what are kind of the benefits of having the government involved in your life, and actually getting married legally, in the state of California?
Well, one of the things is obviously taxes, right? If you have the government involved and you are married, legally married, and you take that piece of paper and you file it with the county, let's say the county of Los Angeles, then you can have your taxes, married filing jointly, right? So there are obviously legal and governmental benefits to being married under the laws of whatever state you're in. Um,
Sorry, just to interrupt you. So you were just saying that if you're married, you pay less taxes, basically?
you didn't know that?
No, I didn't know that.
That's potentially, I mean, this I'm not giving tax advice, you understand.
Yeah, yeah.
But, married filing jointly is a different tax bracket all on its own than married filing single
Mm.
or just filing single. So a lot of I know with the gay community that we represent, their marriage, they can file married filing jointly, as opposed to filing single. And so there are benefits, obviously, to having that type of marriage, recorded with the county that you live in. And so, yes, there are benefits, but, everybody has to make that decision for themselves.
Mhm. Yeah, it's not easy, deciding to make that decision. I guess if you're gonna have kids and stuff like that, it's better to kinda get married and make it all very official. I don't know. I mean, I'm just speaking out of hand, but I'm just if you're thinking about raising a family, you'd probably wanna do it within all the confines of the law.
I mean, potentially. Again, I think that's something that the couple has to decide for themselves,
Mm.
but I think it's just the norm, right? Like you get married, you file that document or your, pastor, your rabbi files that document with the state and now you are officially legally married under the laws of let's say California and then unfortunately, when you get divorced, you have to stay within those confounds as well. And California is a 50-50 community property state, like unlike New York, which is equitable division state. So everything is 50-50. But where it gets a little tricky, obviously, is when you're bringing separate property that you have before you were married, into your new marriage. And so that's where it gets a little bit tricky, right? Because let's say it was a house and now the house goes up in value. Who gets that equity,
Mhm.
right? Because you're married. And so if you're paying the mortgage, that's from your community property wages and you're paying separate property. So that's where you definitely need to get a lawyer to go over, who keeps what and how and when and things like that.
That sounds incredibly complicated.
Well, that's why you come to me, Ryan. It's very easy for me.
I already got divorced, but I didn't know you at that stage, but it was okay, we got through it. But, I'm just curious, like, what are some of the biggest reasons why you see people getting divorced here in Los Angeles and where you practice?
So finances, obviously, number one reason. Um, Illness, people getting sick. I feel like, in your vows, when you say for richer or poor, sickness or in health, all of these things that you say in your vows, I just feel like maybe people don't take those vows very seriously, right? That's why we have such a high divorce rate. You said, I think at one point 50, no, it's more like 60% in Los Angeles County, and it's a high percentage also in Orange County.
Wow, 60% of people in LA County who get married get divorced.
I think it's actually 62%.
I'm a little bit more of a cynic than you. I think okay, so take this number 62%. So people get married, everyone's happy, big ceremony, big party. And then what, 3 years later, 5 years later, 10 years later, whatever, 62% of those happy people get divorced. Now, how many of those people who got married originally are staying in unhappy marriages because they can't afford to get divorced, or they're staying, in it for their kids or something like that. So when you think of that, like 62% of the people had the nerve and the strength and the guts to get
Courage.
divorced, the courage, and then there's still what, 38% of people who are staying in marriages, and I promise you not all 38% of those people are happy. Is that too tough to is that too tough for no, I'm just, like, because that's where further abuse might happen. That's where, like the people who are getting divorced, I feel like are coming to the table because they realize there's problems. But then the other 38%, like, that's where you could have child abuse or other kind of emotional abuses that, kind of go undetected until they're eventually ready to get divorced. It just seems like such a crazy concept to me. Y-
Yeah, I mean, listen, I'm a divorce attorney. I agree with you, but you know what? I think every couple has to make that decision for themselves. Obviously, having a prenup, a foolproof prenup, not a prenup that you guys just decided to draft yourselves because California has very strict prenup rules and laws. And so I think it's important to have that discussion with the person you're going to marry. And maybe it is just, let's not file this. Let's not file this for the first 6 months. But why? I want to file it. But why do you need it filed? I think it's important to have those discussions. And I feel like the good news with the millennial generation is that they are going to have these discussions. And the reason why is because they've seen their parents divorce.
Yeah.
And so I know, like, for my three stepsons, they're like, well, the oldest, I think, will get married, but the other two are like 20 and 20 and 22. They're in college. They're like, we don't want to get divorced. Like, what is the benefit of divorce? Because they've seen their parents, right? And they've seen their friends' parents get divorced, and then their teachers has been divorced, and their counselor has been divorced, and their gym teacher, and so they've seen it. So they're like, well, I don't know what benefit. Is it just because, the IRS gives us a break on taxes? I mean, that's not going to be sufficient for them to do it, right? So what is the benefit? And I know at least one of the three, I won't mention who it is, but is like, I'm not getting divorced and I'm not getting married. And if I get married, I'm going to have her sign a prenup. And we're like, what? You're like 22. But he's already thinking like this. So I think the millennial generation is going to really understand the weight of what it means to be married and they might hold off on that. They might not just do it like the first year they meet someone. They might say, you know what, I really need to live with you and make sure that we're on the same page.
Yeah. No, it's yeah, the education level of the up and coming generation is definitely much higher than maybe our generation, right? Like if you're in your late 40s or early 50s, your parents probably got married with little or no fanfare because that's what everyone did. And then now, I mean, all of my friends, all their parents are divorced. Like almost everyone I know from my childhood has divorced parents at this stage. And it's just, you're right. It's just something we all live with, and we all watch other people go through it, and then we all say, "Not for me."
Right. I think it was a cultural thing, like to your point. It was sort of like this was the norm and this is just the way we did it. And I know as, coming from a Persian background, that's what you did, And so it wasn't like nobody could question it. And I think people that questioned it and said, maybe this is not for me, they were sort of outcast or the black sheep. Like, why wouldn't you want to do this? Like, marriage is a great thing. Well, actually, statistics say it's not, right? Because when you get divorced, you have to split assets. If you have children, can only see your children up to, the law says 50%, maybe more, if you were involved with your child while you were married, but there's no guarantee for that, right? And so, statistically, yeah, I mean, it's not the best idea, but I think our generation, you're right. And I'm not assuming that you're from my generation, but, me at 50, this is just what we did. We got married, we filed it and, like, said a Hail Mary that this is gonna work, and that was it, and we tried our best. It's not like we weren't trying, but, you'll appreciate this, divorce attorneys say that, the first marriage is a starter marriage, just like a starter house, like, you get your first house, but that's not the house you're going to live in forever. That's what sort of some divorce attorneys say, like the starter marriage, it's the first marriage, and it's like when you're in your, teens, 20s, or 30s, and then you get divorced, and then you have your second marriage. But statistically, second marriages do worse than first marriages, and third marriages statistically do worse than first marriages.
Wow.
Yes. So I think it's 62%, and then it's higher for second marriage. And then believe the third marriage is like 72%. Like you will 72% get divorced if you're on your third marriage.
Are there any statistics, between heterosexual, couples and homosexual couples? I'm just curious.
I believe it's the same. I don't believe there's any like difference whatsoever. I believe that um as a community, we just don't know what it takes to have a successful marriage. And do you want to know what it takes?
I would love to know what it takes.
Okay, get out your piece of paper, jot these down. Number one thing is communication. It's not just like you and I talking, but is Ryan understanding what I'm saying? You know what I mean? Because a lot of times people and couples communicate, but is the other person comprehending what is being said? So, are they being defensive, let's say, or are they becoming resentful? Um, I think a lot of times, listen, we all have childhood trauma. We just do, right? And I think people don't take care or they don't heal their childhood trauma and they bring it into a relationship and they think the relationship is going to fix them or fix it. And really what the relationship does is just shine a brighter light, kind of like the one you have right there, on the relationship. So, you know, childhood trauma, I believe, needs to be dealt with prior to getting married. And then, obviously, finances, like making sure your finances are healthy. So when you come into a new relationship, there's not this push and pull about finances.
Well, as a little aside, sorry to interrupt. I heard a crazy story the other day of a young man and a young woman getting married, and the man actually hid the fact that he had like $350,000 of student debt that he hasn't. paid off yet, and then, well, I guess when they got married, that became, like, their debt together, and, like, that's a big issue, right? Like, understanding each other's finances, like, are you in debt? Have you been bankrupt before? You know, what kinds of things do you own, if any? Like, having a frank and open and honest conversation about that, I feel like that could, you know, help a lot moving forward.
Yes, and that's, finances is number 1, right? And that communication, and sometimes people are devious, and they're like, "I don't wanna tell the person because I love them and I'm afraid of losing them." Well, that's not really love though, right? That's not love, because love is being vulnerable and saying, "Look, I have this student loan debt and I will work 3 jobs to pay it off." And by the way, in California, student loan debt is separate. So it's actually separate. So if you're thinking about not telling, make sure you tell the person that you want to get married to, because they have a right to know. And so, but just having a communication about it is so important. I know I talk about prenups a lot, and people always say, "Well, like, I don't know, like, is she or he gonna sign it? I don't know." And I'm like, if you're already thinking you don't know and you wanna marry this person, like, that should be sort of a red flag. Maybe not a red flag, but at least an orange flag,
Oh,
right?
it's definitely red.
Just have a discussion, and I don't think that prenups are right for everyone, because prenups are very expensive to draft. Both people have to have their own attorneys in California, so they're very expensive. But at least have that discussion, and if you're afraid of having that discussion, then guess what? That is, to your point, a red flag.
Mhm. Yeah, I mean, it's so hard, I think, for people to sit down and with someone that they love and care about and be like, "What's the next 10 years gonna look like?" And then, like, "What's it look like if we get married? And what steps do we have to do before we get married? And then once we're married, how do we wanna live? And then if it all goes bad, how does it end? And are we prepared for that? And what paperwork do we need along the way? Or how do we position our lives in order to deal with that with the least amount of stress? And no one has these conversations because everyone it's like a criminal's mentality. Like every criminal commits a crime thinking they're never gonna get caught. Every couple gets married thinking that they're gonna last forever. It's like a fool's prophecy.
Yes, 100%. 100%.
I'm so glad you agree with me on that. I didn't wanna have to that could have been a huge argument between us, but we ended up agreeing.
No, because I'm looking at you and I'm understanding what you're saying, right? I'm understanding that this is not what you want. It's not what I want. But if people can just have open communication and dialogue about it, and just realize that, you don't want to be divorced. Listen, I'm a divorce attorney. I go to court a couple of times a week. I do this for a living. And I will tell you that divorce is very difficult. It's extremely difficult. It's like literally, like if you take a heart, right, and you just like cut it, and it's not even, right? Because someone has more of maybe the heart and the other, it's really, really difficult. And then moving past that, like, how do you get healed from that? Can one ever get healed from a divorce? And that all takes time. And what unfortunately happens is people get divorced and they want to make sure that their spouse knows that they're not wrong. So what do? They get into another relationship quickly within the first 6 months. I've had clients say, "Can I bring my girlfriend or boyfriend to court?" I'm like, "What? You're not even divorced yet." And in California, because there's no jury, there's only a judge. That judge, their decision is subjective to some degree, right? It's under the law, but they see this other person coming to court and they're like, "Who's this other person?" And so
I
I
didn't
re-
I didn't know there was no judge or jury in California. Is that just for family law or for all court,
it's just the judge.
oh,
There's no jury, but there's one judge. And so, you can sort of make an impression on a judge, right? By bringing the new person in when you're not even divorced yet. Now, California is a no fault state. So I still don't like making that impression on the judge, right? Like,
what what
who is
does
that person?
what does no fault state mean?
That means that you don't have to prove, why you're getting a divorce.
Oh,
You can just say that, you just it's there's a difference and you just mark that box off. The other box you can mark off is I believe it's insanity, like incurable insanity or something like that. So those are the only two reasons in California you can be divorced. So you don't have to prove that your spouse cheated, for instance. So, and no fault state is actually it's very controversial because some people believe, well, that makes it really easy for people to get divorced. And so we're not going to discuss that now, but if you want to have me back on to discuss that, we can, but it's very controversial. But California is no fault state, so you don't have to prove why you're getting divorced.
isn't it better if it's easier to get divorced?
Again, it's, people have so many different views on it.
Sure.
But, my view is I'm just going to go with California is saying at the moment.
Mm, that's interesting. So this is all new to me, right? I have all kinds of questions. So this is great. Like I didn't understand what a no fault state was. But that's yeah, that's kind of wild. Like because you'd think that if people could get divorced easier and faster and with less stress, that there would be less harm between the divorcees and whatever children they have as well, right? If it's like a quick and easy process versus a long and tormented one. That's just my thinking, but maybe I'm wrong.
Well, in California, one of the laws is that by the time you file your petition for divorce, you cannot be legally divorced until 6 months has passed. So that within that 6 months, a lot of things can happen. But California has that. Some states have a 1 year waiting period. They call it a cooling off period or a waiting period. And so that's not about no faults because I'm trying to avoid that.
Okay.
Avoid that at the moment. But so California does have some parameters. And when you go to get that final divorce judgment, a judge will ask you if you're in court, do you think that therapy would help you reconciling with your spouse? So they will ask those questions. If you're at that judgment point, usually couples 99.9% of the time are saying no, therapy will not help um, resolve the issues that we have, and we want the court to, grant us the divorce.
In your family law practice, like specifically around marriages and divorces and stuff like that, like what percentage of your clients come to you before they get married versus just when they come to you when they need to get divorced? Like, I'm curious, like what percentage of your clients are thinking about prenups and stuff like that before they even get married? Is it like 50-50, or is it like only maybe 10% of people come in for prenups before they get married?
So because we handle, high net worth celebrity type clients, they're already thinking about the prenup because they have assets prior to getting married or they are anticipating, you know, getting on a network or getting on a show or, musicians, going on tour, things like that. So they're already thinking about these things. But I would say that the general population is not really thinking about prenups. They're thinking about, oh my gosh, I just got engaged. They don't pause. They don't exercise that pause. Like, what does this really mean? They're like, let's get the dress, let's get the venue, let's get the flowers. They put all this energy into things that are more material, in my opinion, and they don't really sit down and say, okay, like they should have discussed this before they got engaged, but what does this mean? Like, who's going to live where? And how are we going to raise our children? Like, how do you foresee raising our children? Like, are you going to be a strict dad? Are you not going to be like, is your child going to go to like a Christian school or are they going to go to a public school? Are they going to go like they don't decide and they don't talk about these things. And by the way, all this is subject to change, but at least you should be having these discussions. So I would say, large population of our clients are already talking about prenups and thinking about them because of just the type of clients that we have. But I want more people to at least discuss them. Doesn't mean you have to, get two attorneys to draft it. but at least discuss it.
I think, I mean, it seems like you know, you're obviously incredibly knowledgeable having your own practice for so many years, and you've probably seen a lot of these cases. Like, you're a great educator. Like, you're educating me, which I appreciate, and you're educating our audience as well. Like, at what stage are we not educating all young people about the challenges? Like, there's not enough 19 and 20 and 25-year-olds and 30-year-olds that are going to watch this podcast and be like, oh, like, marriage is great, but we should also be prepared. So maybe it's not going to work, right? Like, it's. I just wonder. Like, we educate we educate people to do so many things. Like, we educate them how to drive a car or how to get a pilot's license, or if you want to be a real estate agent. But it just seems like with marriage, it's just go for it. And then also too with parenting, it's just like go for it. And that seems completely bananas to me, because getting married and staying married is clearly one of the hardest things in the world to do. You said 62% in LA County get divorced. And then if you're having children, then that 62% of the children, if you have children in that category, they're going through a divorce at whatever age they happen. Like, it's just so traumatic for everyone. You think like everyone, like the state of California, would have people like you connecting with young people, teaching them how to be better, maybe how to avoid divorce, what to think about before getting married. Like, just basic conversational stuff would help so much. And no one's getting that education.
Yeah, that's a good point. Maybe we should start that. Maybe we should start that in schools and in you and I. And we go and we no, seriously, like have a curriculum and say, you know what, this is like, you know, it's like it also ties into finances too. If we pitch that idea, they might go for it, right?
Mhm.
Like, you know, this is what happens, God forbid if you get a divorce, because we have to say God forbid because nobody wants to believe they'll ever gonna get a divorce. But God forbid you get a divorce. This is what this looks like. Half of your finances gone. Like I always tell my clients, here's a pie and we can only work within the confounds of this pie. Like, I can't go get you money from somewhere else. So, this is a financial pie, and now we have to split it.
Right.
And one person that, let's say, has been, working really, really hard, and maybe one person is they're working hard, but they work at home, maybe they're raising the child. That's working hard, but that's not financial, right? And so now they're going, well, what do you mean? And I'm like, do you see any other money that we can come up with? No. And so you teach that to maybe like maybe in high school, right? Or even a college course, and they'll get that. They'll say, "Well, what do you mean? But I worked for this money." Yeah, but you decide to get married to this person and maybe, financial literacy, maybe classes or something. I don't know. I think we should talk about it.
I think they'd be great actually, because like imagine like a senior level class in high school for all the 17 and 18-year-olds out there, or however old you are at some stage, just before you go on to university, right? It's like one full year class on how to fucking live as an adult. Pardon my language, but it should talk about, like, don't eat poisonous food, and what kind of chemicals am I looking for in poisonous food that makes us want to eat too much and makes us bloated and makes us sick. And then also too, financial literacy, how to use an Excel spreadsheet, how to keep track of monthly expenses, how to keep track of assets, and then the third one is like how to manage relationships as an adult, how to manage your primary relationship as an adult if you choose to get married. Like, maybe just those three things could help so much down the road, avoid so much misery.
I agree. I mean, I still remember when I was at least in college at Loyola, I remember topics of psychology that were discussed. So even if they get one nugget, right, and they go, you know what? I remember what happened to mom and dad when they got divorced, or dad and dad when they got divorced, right? And so even if they get one nugget and learn something, I think it would be this is how you effectuate change, right? Like we're talking about why do people get married? Why do they do it under the government, right? Why do they file it? Well, this is something to say like, look, you have a choice in this.
Mhm.
And I know your mom and grandmother, or maybe your dad is pressuring you into marriage, but these are your choices and you don't have to necessarily make the same choices that they have because it hasn't worked, right? And until we can figure out how to make it work with, I believe, psychology, healing your childhood traumas is a really, really big one. I believe that's why celebrities get divorced. Nobody talks about this. Why do they have like a 70 to 80% divorce rate with celebrities? It's because they have childhood trauma that's never been dealt with. They've only been told you're a star.
Well, you have to have childhood trauma in order to become a celebrity. That's part of the deal.
Maybe, I don't know, but, I will say that, I was raised in LA. I've, done some acting, I've done some of that, so I totally get what you're saying, like, sometimes you use that and you tap into that to become the best actor, guitarist, let's say. I'm not thinking about Axl Rose, I just said guitarist, right? And so, sometimes you have to, right? But the reality is, like, when you take that childhood trauma into a relationship, that's a recipe for disaster.
But not enough people know that. And so no one's trying to fix themselves before they get married. Like no one's going to therapy being like, "Oh, I got a lot of childhood trauma. I should sort that out before I unpack that onto my future wife and future children." Like no one has that foresight, right? And again, it's the whole criminal mentality. It's like, "Oh, like I'm just going to get married and everything will be fine because I guess fine is all we know." And I think the people who perpetuate this vision that marriage is just going to be fine and everything will be happy and dandy. These are the worst people, like marketing people, Tiffany's, like television shows, like that all just have this happy go lucky married life. It's all bullshit because even the best people who stay married, it's hard no matter what. And like, I love these like 60, these couples that are like 80 years old that have been married for 60 years. And they're just like, yeah, it's really, really, really hard. And like, just buckle down and be ready for the toughness. Like, no one tells you that until it's too late.
Right. Nobody tells you that until you're already in it. And you can testify to that, right? Because you were married and divorced. But marriage is a great thing. I will be honest with you. You just have to go into it with more education and more insight. And I still am going to go back to what you said about teaching seniors this in school. I think that's how we can, people go, well, nothing is going to change. The divorce rate's just going to keep going up. No, we can actually have an input in these, young adults. They don't want to be referred to as children, but young adults, right? And so just kind of telling them, you don't have to do what your parents did that did not work, actually. And so, but yeah, I think having more podcasts like this, not to be plugging your podcast, but just to have more discussions like this, I think is very important.
Well, let's go back to you as an educator. So you did start a podcast with your law firm where you are talking about these issues. And I love this because you're actually trying to educate people who might need your services someday, but you're also maybe educating people of how to avoid using your services someday and how to actually maybe, you know, find happiness out there somewhere. I don't mean to laugh. I don't mean to be that skeptic or that much of a skeptic. But why don't you tell me a little bit about your podcast that you started?
So, this year, 2024, I started a podcast. Actually, the firm and a really good friend of mine, his name is John McKinney. We were writing a lot on our social media about narcissism, this idea that society now is everything is narcissist, right? He was a narcissist, she was a narcissist, this person's a narcissist, and nobody really knows what that means unless obviously you're a psychotherapist and you have a psychology background.
Or sorry, or if you start a podcast with your own name on it.
Correct. And so, and so,
That's me. Sorry.
it's called the Narcissist Abuse Recovery Channel. And I started it with a good friend of mine. And we really do talk about, narcissists and, other cluster B personality disorders and what that looks like and how to recover and heal from these types of people. And the reason why I'm interested in this is because 5 years ago, I discovered what narcissism was. Clients would come to us and say, the person's toxic, abusive, all these things, but we couldn't label it. We would just call it like toxic and put it like, okay, the person's toxic. Okay, tell me what. And so as divorce attorneys, we're like, yeah, 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 we know the person's awful. That's why you're here. And we sort of discounted the person's experience that they were having. Now, I think, like, in the last 5 years, people are saying, "No, they're narcissistic, and here's what they're doing." Like, they have a profound lack of empathy. They don't care about, our child. They're doing this, they're doing that, and so I decided, this year it took, like, a couple of years for me to do a podcast because 'cause I'm so busy with the practice of law, but with my good friend, we decided to do this as sort of like a community outreach. Um, we don't get anything from it except like what you get, just spreading the word, and helping the community understand things and learn things. And so it's called the Narcissist Abuse Recovery Channel. NARC is the acronym. I thought that was kind of clever. I cannot take credit for that because that was all John. But it's on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and it's been great because so many people have reached out. We've only done one season, 5 episodes, and people have reached out to us and said, like, thank you so much because I didn't know I didn't know what I was going through until I listened to your podcast. And so we're kind of giving people sort of a voice and saying you're not alone because when you're married or in a relationship with a narcissist, you feel very isolated and alone.
Right. Isn't everyone in LA a narcissist in some way, shape, or form?
I think I know you're trying to like get me in trouble here.
I'm not. I'm just saying, like, because we're in the like, this is the capital of the entertainment industry, and everyone is fighting for their own exposure, right?
Yes.
And when you fight for your own exposure, that usually means putting everyone around you into the shadow. So I just feel like, like every LA resident who has more than 5,000 Instagram followers thinks they're a major celebrity, and probably everyone around them is getting in the way of them chasing their dream of being a star. So I just find that so great. Like you're not in San Antonio, Texas, starting a podcast about narcissism, right? You're in LA. Like, this is the heart of of where the disease is running rampant.
Yes. Well, I agree with you, but again, I don't diagnose people, but people have narcissistic traits, and you can have a narcissistic trait and not be a full-blown narcissist. And actually, it's sort of comical because people say, "Well, narcissists, there's only 5%, general population." And I'm like, "That's a lot of people." And narcissists don't usually go and get diagnosed. So you don't really know if the person is an actual narcissist or not because they're not going to be diagnosed. The interesting part about narcissism is that everybody else is in therapy except the person that really needs it. And so, we give our clients a voice and we say, "Look, I don't know if your spouse is a narcissist or has narcissistic traits or is bipolar or a sociopath. Only you know that because you lived with the person." My mom is 90 years old and she always says, "Nobody knows what happens in a marriage except the two people. And even they don't know sometimes what's happening." And so we can't judge what somebody is, but I have definitely seen narcissistic traits, literally going into court and going, "Oh my gosh, this person has narcissistic traits." I don't know if they're a full-blown narcissist. And here's the bad part about all of this, Ryan. Are you ready for this?
I'm ready.
Narcissists actually hire narcissistic attorneys. So while my client is fighting with their spouse in divorce court, I'm arguing, not fighting, arguing, persuading their attorney who's also has narcissistic traits. Because like my husband always says, like, eagles fly with eagles, doves fly with doves. And so, he always says pigeons fly with pigeons. They don't fly with, eagles, right? And so they sort of get together and the narcissistic attorney will say, everything is true. Everything my client is saying is true and not actually fact find. What I do with my clients is we fact find, like, okay, you're saying that your spouse does this, but show me documentation, show me proof so I can tell the court that this is what your spouse has done. Well, I said, but okay, but is there text messages? Is there videos? Is there pictures? Is there proof of this? Because I want to make sure that my client is not wrong and is not being emotional and saying or making allegations that are not true.
Yeah, I mean, basic evidence would be crucial to proving that someone treated you badly or behaved as a narcissist. Um, I really like this educational aspect, and I'm really glad you're doing a podcast because I think a lot of people can benefit from it. So, what kind of topics do you talk about the podcast? So, you said you just finished season one, you just did 5 episodes, but what kinds of topics do you unpack, just so the audience knows, and maybe they'll want to go over and have a listen?
So the first pilot episode was just John and I. He has a huge following on Instagram called Male Victims of Female Narcissists. He's got over 10,000 followers, and he does male coaching and things of that nature. So the first pilot episode is just him and I talking about our personal raw journey with narcissists in our lives. And then really the second, third, fourth, and fifth is guest speakers. Like we had a good friend of mine who is a licensed family therapist, psychotherapist. He does an episode with us. We had this guy Luke. He was great. He talked about how to become healthy because when you are in a narcissistic relationship, you're second, right? The only way that it works is if you put yourself second and last. And so he talks about health and how it's so vitally important to get healthy, especially if you're going through a separation or divorce. And so we have, a lot of, guest speakers so far. I'm very excited because we just, for season 2, we have one of the Real Housewives, that's gonna be I'm not gonna say who, but she's gonna be on the podcast. Obviously, my our office is in Orange County, Newport Beach, so, I do represent, a couple of those, types of, Bravo clients. I think they're called Bravo Celebrities. It's and then parental alienation, we go over parental alienation because that can definitely is a hot topic in family law and divorce.
Parental. So when parents just stop taking care of their kids.
No, it's actually deeper than that. It's when one of the parents is alienating their own children, unfairly, obviously, with the other co-parent.
Oh, really?
Yes.
That's ugly.
That becomes very difficult in court to prove, and it has psychological impacts, obviously, on the child because they don't know, right? They don't know what's happening to them. So, you should listen to that. You look sort of interested. I think you should.
I'm interested in all of it, and I I know I have so many friends of mine that are fathers and mothers, but I can just like of the community around me who are male, like I know a lot of them who are fathers and they really suffer with, trying to make sure they give both children the same amount of attention, try to make sure that they're home at a certain time, trying to make sure that they're being a part of their life at school and at sports and all these things and how difficult that was. And one of my friends who came on the podcast a long time ago, he might come back someday. His name's Thomas. He actually he had a really difficult time, and he talks about this on the podcast, so I can speak about it publicly. But he had a really difficult time in the early stages when they had their 2 kids because it was just like their lives were taking up his entire life, and he had difficulty understanding that balance. And he actually went so far as to do hallucinogens and ayahuasca, which is where that part of that story was going. But when he did that ayahuasca experience and stuff like that, he realized like he started to see himself through his children's eyes. And it was heartbreaking because like sometimes he wouldn't give them enough attention when they were kind of like asking for it. And he was just kind of dismissive of their problems or what they wanted to talk about in the moment. And it took him like that revolutionary experience to be a better parent. And I was just thinking to myself, like, no one else does that. Like, if so few people would never go to that extent to figure out why they're unhappy or to why they're not connecting with their children or why their children aren't connecting with them or what's the root cause of all of that. And you just said like everyone has, child trauma that they haven't unpacked yet. And then we just stack that on top of our children, for the next generation to roll with it. There's just there's so many issues out there with all of us, and it's interesting to see like how we pass that on to our significant others and then to the rest of the family.
Yep. Actually, my the the guest we just had, I want to talk about him for 2 seconds. Radical self love. And he talks about literally drugs, narcissism, alcohol, sex. I mean, the whole thing. Like, literally, the podcast was just him talking about his life. And he's got, I think, over 200,000 followers. And it's amazing because all these people sort of have something in common. It's, somebody in their life was a narcissist, whether it was like a family member, a parent, a spouse, a teacher, a neighbor, and it's like, to your point, is LA the epicenter of narcissism? And I'm not going to say yes or no, but it comes pretty close, I think, to maybe Orange County,
Right.
And so I think it's because a lot of people come to LA from different parts too of the state, different states. And so they want to be, a Hollywood star. I mean, why else would you be here?
Yeah. Have you seen like an increased rise of divorces like since the era of social media? So you started your practice, you said in 2003. That was kind of before all social media came out. Like I think YouTube and Facebook were a little bit later than that. And then Instagram, I think it was like 2012 or 13. Like how, just speaking specifically, I guess, about this whole narcissism role and how social media has lit us all on fire in our lit us all in our narcissist ways completely on fire by giving us this opportunity to export our thoughts at any moment, making it feel like we're really important all the time. I'm wondering if you've seen any shifts between like before social media was very prevalent to now where it's part of our everyday lives.
So I filmed a docu-series about this. I don't It's coming out in 2025. And it's funny because I posted like a little preview of it on Instagram, and guess what happened? It got taken down for community guidelines because I said that social media is causing more divorces these days. And Instagram or Meta or whoever owns that now is saying like, "No, we don't want you to say this." Like, but that's the truth, right? Because what happens with social media is that we can see somebody else having a better life than us. And so a lot of times what happens is people will reach out like through Facebook, through Instagram, like to these people that they never had access to. Right. I mean, so many times you hear like, oh, I reached out to, I don't want to say a name, but let's say Bradley Cooper. And he texted me back. He DM'd me back. And you're just like, how did that all happen? Well, it never would have happened because this person would never know that he lives, let's say, at the East Village in New York City, right? They just wouldn't know that. And so much of their private life was kept private, even the celebrities. And so, yes, I think social media has a huge influence on, divorces these days. Like Facebook, people are getting together with like old flames. Like, how would you even find that if you didn't have Facebook, let's say? And, in a one sense, it's really good because you get information like readily available. But as far as divorcing, I think it does definitely cause people to realize this person has it better. And if I'm not happy in my marriage, maybe I should just stay single. Like, look at so and so, right? Because they're posting from Dubai, they're posting from Paris, they're posting from London. And once they get divorced, though, they realize, well, a lot of times, sometimes people think, Maybe I shouldn't have done that, or maybe I did that hastily." Maybe I should have worked it out. Or maybe that old flame, wasn't worth a second shot, like J-Lo and Ben Affleck. So, yes, I do believe social media has a huge impact on, you know, reasons why people just are not working it out. They just are not doing it.
Yeah, I mean, you think about when your parents got married in Iran, right? And or how when my parents got married in Canada. I think my parents got married in the 70s, like no social media, really hard to meet new people. Like you had to go out like to connect with anyone, right? You had to go to a restaurant or a bar to meet anyone. Like now people just sit at home and they can text anyone in the world or message anyone in the world on social media. Like that's kind of terrifying.
Right, and social media, as you know, and I know, is not necessarily real, right? Because there's filters, there's all different types of things, and you don't really know someone because their life is very curated. So, when I like for my personal social media, I'm not putting the times like I'm upset or I'm crying. Like, who does that, right? Although some people do that on TikTok for attention. But I'm just saying, like, it's very a curated life. And so if you're looking at that going, well, they have it better, and it's not true. Even influencers now are coming out and saying, we are not going to filter our lives anymore, and we're going to give you the raw version of us, which may or may not be interesting, right? Because
Well, it might be a lot more interesting, but all the sponsors and people who pay them to do paid placements might go elsewhere because no one wants a sad person, dancing on Instagram in their newest fashion outfit.
correct, exactly.
So we talked a lot about divorce and marriage, but obviously your firm does a lot of like family law. So like what other elements of law do you specialize in just in case everyone out here is already happily married?
So, no, well, family law, it comprises of separation and divorce. Family, like parentage cases, like if people are not married and they have a child together, they still have to go through the family court system. But that's sort of our niche, right? Is the sort of high conflict um, resolution or dissolution of marriages.
hmm And just, do you have any like crazy Hollywood stories that could only happen in Hollywood that you can share that doesn't affect anyone's lives or attorney-client privilege?
Yes, I actually do. y- you know, I don't know if this is funny, but I do have a client who filed for divorce, uh, her and her spouse, over 4 times in 2 years. And, files for the divorce, gets the restraining order, very difficult to get, okay, especially permanent restraining orders. Gets it, everything is fine, gets right back with their spouse. Then, you know, I get the angry call like, "Make sure you dismiss my action. We're going to flying to Paris." Like, "What?" Like, and so, of course, I have to dismiss it, and that takes a while because the judge has to sign it and stuff, and then again, literally 3 months later, "Oh, I can't take this anymore," and then so I don't that's not funny, obviously, I'm not gonna give you funny stories because, divorce sucks for everyone, but, so 4 times they filed for divorce and restraining orders each time and had it dissolved, so in 2 years period of time, that is to me, that's just insanity,
Mm.
you know? Um, I don't like that. I don't like representing people like that because what happens is it ties up the court for people that really need it, especially domestic violence, like people that really need domestic violence help. Sometimes a judge will like kick it back a day, right? Because they're so busy that day with so many cases. So that's obviously, a crazy type of case that we get. And it's just like, oh my goodness, just make up your mind, and divorce is a serious thing. It shouldn't be just, sort of like a chess move, and but there are people that treat it that way, unfortunately.
Yeah, and there's no way of knowing, like, if a case is frivolous or if this person has already done this 6 times in the last 5 years or not. Like, you have to take every case on the merits of, who that person is and the seriousness of the situation. Like you said, getting divorced is really serious. Getting married is very serious. Like, but some people end up, yeah, making kind of a hilarity about it for no reason because they keep flip-flopping on decisions and things like that.
Right. I mean, I definitely was not her first or second attorney. I was her third attorney. And when she came back, I said, I'm not going to represent you in the fourth one because I don't I think you're doing this for leverage and some kind of sick game, and I'm just not interested in it. But I think that, that case was interesting to say the least. As attorneys, divorce attorneys, we get a bad rap because, like you said before, well, don't you just take every case? And no, I mean, there are some attorneys, good attorneys that are moral. some of them are my friends, they won't take a case where they know the person is lying. They're like, I don't care how much money you give me, I'm not going to represent you. And so, I'm hopefully of that sort of generation that gets that, right? That like we want to be very moral. And that's why I think divorce attorneys get such a bad rap, because there are attorneys that will just, it's like, Saul Goodman, he was personal injury, but like there's divorce attorneys like that. And they, Ryan, have a reputation. Like you see them coming down the court hall, in downtown LA, which is our main courthouse, 111 North Hill Street, my second home. And you see them and you're like, oh my goodness, there they are, and everybody knows that. And actually, it's interesting because I have no shame. So I told an attorney this recently. It was actually 2 months ago. In Whittier of all places, and I said, you have a bad reputation. You have a reputation for stirring up conflict where there's no conflict. And what she did is actually she proceeded to go back to her office and write a 7-page letter about me and my, trial skills. Thankfully, the her client, got rid of her and subbed her out, so I got that, last week, so I was like, "Yes, he saw the light, that this wasn't a good attorney." Like, as an attorney, we should keep our emotions in check, because I may not like opposing counsel for whatever reason, but I have to represent my client and my client's child, and so there's always a child involved, and what I do, because I can be, sort of like, stoic, but then get, assertive, is be very child focused. And so if you think about the child and what I do, which is a little bit strange, but I ask my client, when you're ready, I'd like a picture of your child, and I put that picture on my folder. And so every time I go to court, I'm thinking about the child. And usually, though, I'll put like a heart with the child's face because you don't want to expose the child's face, right? And so I've been in meetings before where the dad's like, what is that? I'm like, that's your child. Well, why do you have a picture of my child? I'm like, because this is why we're here. Because you can't get along with my client, which is fine. You guys will eventually move on, get remarried, not get remarried, travel, whatever, right? But your child is in the middle of all of this. And unless you realize that, like, you need to do what's best for your child, and they get really happy. They've actually cracked a smile, like you are right now. Like, they'll be like, wow, okay, she gets it. I'm like, I'm not here to like hurt you. I could, but I'm not here to hurt you, right? I know bad things, but I'm not here to hurt you. I just want what's, advocate for my client and your child. And sometimes you're not seeing that because you're like so angry. And this is obviously not gender specific. It could be the woman doing that, right? The mom doing that, or and I always say, if you don't have a child, it's so much easier, right? It's still difficult, but you don't have this innocent third or fourth or fifth party in the mix. And so we always focus on the child, very child focused. And my clients, they love that.
So during COVID, everyone I know either got divorced or had a baby. So how busy was COVID for you? Like 2020, 2021, 2022, 2023? Like, did you see a huge uptick in divorces, or was it just like pretty much the same since 2019? I'm just curious what happened in LA during that time.
Yes, there was a huge uptick, but what I did was I not only had my law practice, I also taught at NYU. So I was doing both at the same time, because you could teach online, which you couldn't really do that before, right? So I taught at NYU at Shack. I taught real estate law. Because and there was a huge uptick in LA, and courts were closed, so people were sort of forced to either wait or do mediation. But yes, there was a huge uptick in divorces. And then right when things opened back up, people were just like, I wanted to get divorced last year and I waited. And it seemed like either COVID during that time for marriages, either it made you or it literally broke you.
Mhm.
And I know with my spouse, like, our relationship just got better and better because we were always together, and we just happen to be, I know this is cliche, but we actually are friends. And so it was like, cool, I get to go do all this stuff with my friend, and I teach, law, and I have my clients, and everything is on Zoom. And so for us, it was, it made our relationship stronger. But yes, there was a huge uptick in divorces.
I believe it. Yeah. In 2019, I moved from Shanghai to Dubai, and I was in Dubai for most of COVID, so I didn't really get a real feel of what was going on in the rest of the world because Dubai was kind of like a little bit of an island, a little bit isolated. But now coming back here, everyone kind of has these horror stories of whatever happened in 2021 or 2022. So it's interesting to hear your perspective on that.
So how is I'm just curious, how is Dubai as far as like marriages and divorces?
I think, it's terrible. Yeah, I think Dubai is like living in Las Vegas. Like, you're just surrounded by everyone having the best time of their lives all the time. So when I had moved to Dubai because I was making, like, global television, traveling all around the world, and it's a great hub 'cause, they've got a few good airlines in that part of the world, so it's very easy to get around if you're filming globally like I was. We filmed, like, 300 days a year for a few years there, which was a lot. So I was only ever there for, like, 4 or 5 days a month, which was perfect. And then when COVID hit, I was there for like 30 days every month for month after month after month. And yeah, it really became exhausting. And also, too, I think, in places like Dubai where there's a huge transient community and people don't really put down roots, they go for a few years and they leave. I think marriages just get completely destroyed in that kind of environment.
Yes, you definitely need to have stability. You need stability for your child, but you need stability for your marriage too. And that's why when one of the spouses travels a lot, recipe for disaster, right? Because the other spouse is sort of, at home tending to the children, or, and then the other spouse is like doing God knows what, right? So like here are the top people that get divorced. You want to know the top is like, unfortunately, police officers, firemen, anyone that travels, like entrepreneurs, that not just are just entrepreneurs, but entrepreneurs that travel a lot. Obviously, pilots, everybody always says pilots. Anybody that's sort of transient, right? They're not stable at home. They're not like going to a job and coming back. Although
You just named everyone in the entertainment industry as well.
right, entertainment, obviously entertainment. Something about fame and fortune, it just, it can either be the biggest blessing or the biggest curse. And so, I love what Jim Carrey once said that, I wish that everybody would have money once in their lifetime, like be super, super wealthy to realize like that's not what's going to make you happy. And that's also not what's going to keep you married.
Mhm. That's for sure. That's for sure. Well, look, this has been great. I mean, is there anything that we left out that you wanted to mention? I mean, we'll get the name of your podcast maybe and the website where we can find your law practice and also the podcast.
Yeah, so Jafari Legal, .com is the website. And then the Narcissist Abuse Recovery Channel, NARC is the acronym, on Spotify and Apple Podcasts.
Can we also find the podcast links on your website? If we all just go directly to your website, everything is there?
Yes, everything is there, and the episodes are there as well.
That's great. So when we post this later, I'll put your law firm website there, and then everyone has one place to go and they can catch it all.
Perfect.
Yeah.
And then, obviously, Instagram, TikTok. I really hope they don't do away with TikTok because it is so fun. And it's like I've learned things, from people. And I really like to be in the know and kind of know what's kind of going on. And especially representing celebrities, you kind of need to be in the know. And I get so much information from TikTok. What do you think is going to happen there?
Um, I'm not sure. Obviously, there's a huge movement that people think that TikTok is some kind of Chinese spyware, and that the Communist Party is destroying the minds of Americans using TikTok. And we'll have to see, what the lawmakers really decide. I mean, I'm a little 50-50 on it. Like, obviously, a lot of Americans make money on TikTok because you can monetize your channel, and people are making huge amounts of money, which I think is a great thing. If you can be creative, if you want to be an influencer, that's your platform. That's great. But then I also, if you've ever taken a look at like the terms and conditions of your phone, And then there's a lot of television shows that where like, people have used TikTok to pinpoint where journalists are or listen into journalists talking about various things, and that's terrifying. But then, anyone can do that to your phone at any time. So it's yeah, it's hugely scary. I I just hope it doesn't get politicized. I hope that, like, whatever decision that the government here makes, that they make it, on somewhat objective lines, and they don't try to politicize it, or they don't make it too much again about China. Like, I don't know. There's this great congressional hearing where the CEO of TikTok comes in and he sits in front of all these lawmakers, and they're just saying, like, how long have you been a member of the Chinese National Party? And he's like, I'm Singaporean, I live in Singapore. And
I know, I've seen that. Oh my gosh, she said that probably like 25 times.
yeah, and like, I don't know who this person is. I've never done a deep dive, but if he was lying, someone probably would have come out and figured it out by now. But the fact that these lawmakers just pumped this guy with the same question like 10 times in a public hearing, makes me think that it's maybe more political than it needs to be.
I agree.
Yeah. Well, look, thank you so much for coming on to the podcast and educating me and the audience. And yeah, and best of luck with your practice, and best of luck helping as many people as you can, especially those in real need. And of course, good luck with the podcast, because I think the education that you can provide people through the podcast will be really helpful, and they'll help a lot of people before they get married, and maybe it'll help a lot of people who are in a difficult situation currently.
Yeah. Thank you so much for having me. I appreciate it.
No worries. Now we can go up here. So show everyone we're in the same room. No Zooms,
No Zooms.
but lovely to meet you. And yeah, feel free to come back anytime.
Okay. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Fade to black, and we're out.